All right, our stream is now live. We'll give everyone a few minutes here to filter in. How is everyone doing today?
Doing pretty good. Glad to be here.
Loving life.
I'm here.
Same.
Present.
That's where I'm at in life. I
I
made it.
had a shower and put pants on today, so today's a good day.
Why are you wearing pants?
I'd argue that means it's not a good day because you had to put pants on.
It's noon and I haven't even managed to do either of those things. Feeling really good about myself. So that's probably a typical Saturday for me.
Same. I mean, I wasn't dressed. I was still in bed at noon, actually, my time.
Late night.
No. No, I went to bed at like 1. I just didn't want to get up.
Oh,
There's no reason to get out of bed anymore now that we all have phones.
Don't you guys have phones?
Yeah. Why are you even getting out of bed on a Saturday?
Yeah, I just remote into my desktop from my phone and post all my auctions.
That's next level, though.
That's the way to do it.
Yep. Getting money for your long boy from the can at work.
Oh, good. I just got the notification that the stream went live. Thanks, Twitch.
Nice. We'll give it a couple more minutes then.
Yeah. See, this is why we need a pre-stream roll. I'm gonna say that in front of all 8 people that are here already, so now you have to.
That's gonna do it next time.
And next time we were saying we're actually just going to feature a live stream of the simulator. It's just going to be me hitting a target dummy for 2 hours.
Or just live stream us screaming at Simcraft for 3 hours straight before the stream.
Which did happen.
More or less is what happened this morning.
yeah, to an extent, though I'd call that half my...
We all woke up.
I mean, I did the same thing.
Max!
To be fair, I did find a few things wrong, but that's okay. They'll get fixed.
Soon, trademark.
Yeah. Starting is half the battle, right?
Hopefully before Tuesday, before everybody just downloads the new branch of SimC and just artistically screeches at their screens why things are...
Yeah. Or they think it's fine, and they're like, wow, this trait blows.
Weird, this trait's giving me 0 DPS. Why is that?
I have to recommend you go to the forums and screech. Tell them to buffer it. Oh, we got a question in chat here. Does the red stream get an anime introduction like the holy stream? No.
I'm insulted. Actually, our pre-show should just be talking about Yeezy and hip-hop gatherings.
Oh.
Like the cool kids talk about in Red General.
Yes, that is lit.
Yeah,
It shall be.
I would feel so out of the loop in that.
3 hours of us dabbing before the red stream.
The pre-show is just going to be you doing Fortnite dances for an hour.
Pretty sure we'd have negative viewers.
We'd have a ton of viewers, just not the ones we want.
Nope.
Alright, we got some people in the chat there, or in the viewer list, so we'll go ahead and continue on. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the PTR later, because again, PTR, the patch is Tuesday for US, Wednesday for the EU, so we'll go over some new information there. But the first thing that we're gonna jump into here, because it's a very common topic that pops up in rep questions, is stat weights. Everyone's asking their stat weights. They're linking their stat weights sims. They're asking what stats they should have. They're asking if they have a good stat distribution. It's all kinds of madness regarding stat weights.
What's the haste cap? Should I stack mastery for AoE? Those kind of shenanigans.
Yeah, so rather than just give you the answer of pawn sucks, stat weight sucks that you always get in rec questions, we're gonna give you guys a little bit of background information that may or may not be useful or insightful.
Yeah, it's gonna blow your mind, believe it.
So the first question is, what are stat weights? I know everyone obviously probably knows what stat weights are. You run your raid bots reports and it shows you. Got an example here, like your strength is equal to 2. Your haste is 1.9 or whatever it says. And there's an assigned value for each stat there. And all that means is that's the approximation. If you were to gain 1 more point of that stat, that's how much more DPS you would do. So in the example here, if you got 1 more point of strength, you would do 2 more DPS. And for a very long time, this was how we evaluated gear upgrades. Back in the days of like Burning Crusade and Wrath Lich King, and even going on past that in Cataclysm and Mr. Pandaria.
But those days are pretty much at an end.
Yeah, even in Warlord, it survived. It lingered a bit in Warlords too, even. But in Legion is what killed stat weights for sure. It was the final nail in the coffin, if I was to say.
Now the big challenge these days is moreover moving away from stat weights to something like Azurite, because those define so much of what we're doing now.
Yeah. So the most common thing that happens is people will see these stat weights, they'll see their haste is weighted above their crit, and they'll just assume they want all the haste they can get. So some people will probably end up dropping item levels just because a piece has haste. So depending how you take that information, it can be misleading. So to give a bit more information about how those come to be, is how our stat weight is calculated, which is, it's a fairly simple process, but there is a little bit involved to it. So what most people assume is because they see that 1 point of strength gives them 2 DPS, they probably assume that the sim is adding 1 point to each stat and running the sim, which isn't the case. That would not, I mean, not that stat weights are accurate as is, but adding a single point would definitely be a lot worse. So what it actually does is there's a default delta, and for that default delta, they use the amount of a rating required to reach 3.5% haste. So I was gonna say in Legion, but in BFA, to get 1% of haste, it's 68 rating, which is lower than the other stats. So 3.5% haste would be 238 rating. So when that stat weight sim runs, each of your stats, strength, haste, crit, verse, mastery, they all get 238 of that stat added to it. And as a side note, you can also you're able to change that value if you want to. You can experiment. If you don't want to use 238, you can change that delta. You can make it lower, you can make it higher. You can have some fun for yourself and see how it changes the results. But what it then does, so it runs the sim, and when you're running a stat weight sim, it's a bunch of individual sims at once. So on raid bots, when you run the sim, you have all those default weights it gives you. That single raid bot sim is, in terms of length, is the same as is the length of 8 quick sims. It's 8 individual sims that go on. And what it does, it'll take your sim of your added stats of 238. It'll take the DPS of your regular profile, and it finds the difference. And then that difference is just divided by the rating, and that's your approximate stat weight. Pretty simple. So if you had 18,000 DPS baseline, and you ran a sim for your haste, and said your haste had a rating of 2, it would sim your character with that 230 extra haste. And then you your sim number for that, which you can't see, it's in the background. Let's say it's something like 18,400. So it'd be 18,400 minus 18,000. And that 400 DPS divided by 238, and there's your stat weight for your haste. It does it for you in raid bots and Simcraft. Just explaining how it actually works. It's not too important.
Sorry to catch up. Yeah, it's just a simple 2-point linear approximation.
Which is, you know,
the difference between the 2 points.
Yeah.
So it gives you essentially an average.
So why is that bad, Skeletor?
Good question.
Well, at first it was good. The reason they added a bunch of that because it was more common then than now, but there were a lot more breakpoints. So by adding a large number of stats and finding the average, it could even out or smooth out for those breakpoints. At the same time, though, those breakpoints could be entirely missed even. But why don't we use stat weights anymore? If you want the one-word answer, Titan Forging. You want more? Legendaries. Azurite.
Yeah.
They threw many wrenches into the
other
loop.
Factors. Yeah.
Yeah. Prior to Titan Forging and all that, we had closed form models set up on spreadsheets for our theory crafting. That's how we did things back in the day. Simcraft kind of sucked back. And it was possible to build an actual definitive best in slot gear set. Like there was no possibility of deviating from that. This is the best gear you can possibly wear. So stat weights were a good way of assessing any other pieces.
Yeah, so what they do is
even when it was capped out at 15 item levels, like you still could kind of aim for stuff, but now like we have Azurite, you know, and Titan Forging can happen forever. Like there's just way more factors than there used to be.
And even more than that, they're antiquated because, yes, Titan Forging and all this, you know, deriving your stats from a standard base set that everybody could theoretically achieve in the end. But more than that, what really disregards stat weights as something as being a valuable function of determining what you want. You can actually just mass sim things now, mass permutation sims of all the gear you have. So that there really is no necessity to figure out what kind of stats you really need. It's just a matter of figuring out what is the best gear in your bags, really.
Yeah, I always try to tell people like they were never as accurate as you think they were. It just was a giant pain in the ass to try to figure out what your best combination of gear was because we didn't have raid bots.
Yeah, so before raid bots, you would have to have your character, and if you wanted to sim multiple profiles, you'd have to manually type in all your copy equals lines and make all the gear sets yourself, which took forever. It was not feasible to do. But now with raid bots, you put your string in there, you click on some shiny buttons, and you get a result. The accessibility factor is very high. I know a lot of people complain about the wait time, but it's 2 to 3 minutes if you're not a Patreon or subscribed direct through their site. If something's happening in 2 to 3 minutes and you need that result right then, maybe you should get a premium subscription. But realistically, you probably don't need that result in 2 to 3 minutes. So
you don't, especially in a world of personal loot. And you can just do all of your loot every 2 hours now. Like it doesn't, you know, if your raid leader is really pushing you to give them an answer in 3 minutes, then I don't know, maybe he should pay for your premium account.
Like my good raid leader does.
Exactly.
She's amazing, by the way. Best raid leader I've ever.
Stop. Nobody actually uses it, but it's there.
Well, I would use it if I didn't have my own already.
Yeah, and some other things like as mentioned, like with when we had those bis sets, that was a potentially obtainable gear set. So the weights were generated from that gear set. So as you acquired new pieces, you were just working towards that gear set, and most likely would end up with a result very similar to a published set. You actually had something you could work towards. Whereas BFA here, you get what you get, and you got to deal with it. And also, there, way back in the day, we had the wonderful stats of hit and expertise. So we had those hit and expertise caps we had to reach. So add-ons like Reforge Lite made that process 1,000 times easier. Also, we used to have Reforging, which we no longer have, unfortunately. But again, the accessibility is the biggest factor, and with raid bots, everything is very easy to do. You
Yeah,
want
we're
to
at a
sim your
state
gear,
even in
your
our build
Azurite,
when
your
we're-
talents, your gems, your enchants. It does it all. So
Yeah, we're at a point where when we want to assess trading gear in our raid, we just tell everyone, okay, everyone who wants this, go sim it. We'll trade it in 2 minutes. And that's it. It's easy.
Yeah, once everybody, I don't even have a limit on the like voting or bidding anymore. Like it's just, why, like raid bots exist is so much. I would rather make a decision based on everybody like having a hard. It's just like, why wouldn't you do it? You're already using this program. It literally takes longer to go get stat weights because you have to do it every time you get an upgrade anyway.
yeah, just to show a bit more, I'm gonna go ahead and switch my view here. Right, this is just one of the options when you do sim your character. Or it's not exposed on raid bots, but you can do it in advance. Is you can have a plot of your stat points. So we just got a few examples here. Like the first one, we have 3 profiles, one from the pre-raid profile, one from the raid profile, and one from a random profile, which we'll get to. But it can give you a bit more insight, because stat weights, I mean, they go up pretty much at the same rate, but there's a lot of bumps in between where the values can fluctuate. So it's just kind of an example here where it shows how much rating there is. So each point here, like 0, 20, it goes up in, I have it set up to go in blocks of 20. And you can zoom in on the graph. You can see most of the volatility in stats happens early on, where it gets a little bit jumbled up around. But as you get more and more stats, that does smooth out over time. And that's the pre-raid profile. To see for a raid profile here, the raid stat scaling, it's pretty much the same. So like in terms of a regular gear set, that's pretty standard. But there's definitely some examples of where things aren't the same. So here's Expurgation. So Expurgation is the special child of BFA here. As you can see, crit is now the best stat when we're using Expurgation trait. It went from being in the middle or slightly below the middle to now being the best stat. So a single trait can throw these numbers off. So if you're swapping your gear constantly or getting new upgrades in your, or I guess not anymore, but if you were getting new Azurite pieces in your Mythic Plus chest and you were changing traits, those stat weights would get invalidated so fast. And if you're already, like Reb said, if you're simming for your new weights, you're already simming. So just take your new result for your DPS and put on the appropriate gear.
Mm-hmm. And like, keep gear, especially rings. Like, I have a ring on, or I have a ring in my bags right now that's like 10 item levels lower or higher than the ones I have on. Just like keep that stuff around and literally just click every piece of gear that you can when you go and compare your gear. And that's all you have to do. It spits out the result. You're already in there trying to figure out what trait you want. And like,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, and it will be increasingly important to sim the permutations of gear you have, especially when you're comparing to traits like Expurgation and any other trait you might have. You'll see here that the crit rating for Expurgation is really high, but that might be a little deceptive for you. You may conclude that, the crit rating is really high, so maybe the DPS is a lot higher. Well, everything's relative, right? So if you look at the maximum amount of DPS you could get with that much crit rating or crit ratio on your gear, it probably wouldn't be much higher than haste would be on any other set. So you really have to consider what you're looking at. You're not going to get the whole picture just looking at these stat scaling charts, but what you should do is kind of step back and think, okay, do I really need to change my stats in this way to get a higher DPS output, or can I just leave it as it is and still get the same, more or less the same amount, and still then have the option to roll into another gear set and still have an optimal set of gear for that as well.
And if there are things that you would rather do, like if you have a trait sitting in your bags that you can also use raid bots to figure out like how much do I have to sacrifice and what is the best gear set with this thing. Because like that's fine too. We're talking about min-maxing here, but like really what you should do is, like, if you find that thing that you like to do, find out what the difference is. Find out what you're sacrificing. And if you're happy with sacrificing that, then do it. Nobody is stopping you. You know, this isn't just about pushing out every DPS point. You know, this is also about figuring out the best way to have fun. That's how you want to use the tool.
True.
So we're really like talking to everyone here, not just the people who are trying to min-max.
Yeah, because like if you were to like take a gear set and swap some of the pieces out of secondaries with non-optimal secondaries, it might be like maybe 200 DPS in the sim. And once you translate that 200 DPS difference from the sim to an actual fight, that difference doesn't exist.
Yeah. You know, so just like I have a Divine Right set because I thought it would be, I hated it, but I thought it would be fun. And I tried to make it work with what I had.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you can do that stuff too. And like you said, like just because it sims higher doesn't mean you're not going to get screwed by RNG.
Though you might be more likely.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Especially,
I mean,
go ahead.
I could rant about expurgation for hours about just how stupid it is with the current, but maybe I'll get to that later.
No, I think we can be happy with the next patch. Well, most people can be happy is that expurgation is gonna go die in a hole. So, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, with a few other things
about that.
All right, so that's enough about stat weights. That's how they work. That's why we don't use them anymore. You should just forget they ever exist. And now we'll talk to what's gonna be about pretty much everything else we talk about is the PTR. So the most exciting thing here is that we wrote is, can we expect any changes to go live with 8.1 or earlier? The answer is already yes. There are already changes this morning to the PTR. So what happened is that the damage of Light's Decree was increased slightly. And technically, Imperium Power had a slight buff. I don't even want to call it a buff. I feel like someone just felt they had to change a number. And they changed
somebody's
the number.
cat ran across the keyboard when they were looking at Imperium Power coefficients. Like, that's what that some.
Yeah, they seen a 5 and made it a 6. Like, that's good enough. Like in the decimal spot, not in the up front.
I'm telling you,
1000.
somebody changed something on one sheet and it messed up another because everything is a spreadsheet. It's not even something happened and this is the result. I don't think it was intentional.
Somebody dropped a meatball on the spaghetti coat.
Exactly.
Yeah, so one thing I didn't put on the slide is we're going to talk about trait stacking, because we got our 2 new traits, the Light's Decree and Imperium Power. So let me go ahead and share my screen there again. Alright, so this is a PTR sim for a single target of our new traits. You'll see here, they're listed twice. There's a standard set, which is just running our typical Righteous Verdict, Hammer of Wrath, Wake of Ashes, and Inquisition. And there's also a set here that has a C. That C is for Crusade. So that's using the same talent set, but instead of using Inquisition, it's using Crusade. So right now we only have 1 rank selected, so we can see the value of the first rank of all these new traits. And you probably hear cat in the background. Okay, but as you can see, our Light's Decree, that first rank of Light's Decree when you have Crusade, it is a very powerful trait. It's a 5.3% DPS gain. As you can see, it pretty much dwarfs everything else that we have available by a good margin. And also Imperium Power is our other trait here. Again, and also it does overtake most of these traits. Now these charts, they're a bit preliminary still. For Tuesday, we'll have more updated resources for you available. So realistically, the Light's Decree and Imperium Power will be a little bit stronger than they show here in some cases. But when the fun...
in some cases.
Yeah, in some cases. But what gets really fun here is once we add a second rank. We add a second rank here, we can see that gain. We went from having a 5.3% gain from one rank to all of a sudden now we only have a 2.14% gain for that additional rank. And look at Imperium Power, it's the same deal. It was a 3.7% benefit. Now it's only 1.15. So what happens is like these traits, all their value is tied up in the first rank.
That's going to be a big deal. I feel like I need to rant about this, but if you
I
give
think
me
you
a
should a little bit because it is dumb and also something that people need to know about. Also, if this is all with Righteous Verdict.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Skeletor, if you actually want to go back to just displaying two traits, X1 and X2, and take out X3. What you'd see here is you might be tempted to say or ask, because 2 ranks of EP is just as much DPS contribution as 2 ranks of any other trait, stacking them can't be bad. And in reality, you would be half right, if only because you just don't have the ability to mix and match traits to a great degree due to gear limitations or whatever. In reality, disregarding these stack sims, the contribution of EP and LD with any other trait other than getting a second of either of those two will be better, though probably not by much. The real issue with these trait tuning comes in with Siege. And with Siege and the introduction of another ring, we will be faced with a pronounced gearing dilemma. In the short term, what we'll end up doing in spec is either trying to get EP and LD on our highest item level gear to amplify those one-off effects, or now that I think of it, inverse that maybe might be better having these traits on the lowest item level gear to keep the other traits that are typically powerful on their own on higher item level pieces, like Relentless Inquisitor, I think is pretty strong without needing any other traits to amp it up. But because those secondary scaling effects are what keeps them down, but after that, it's probably safe to assume that some combination of RI traits and Avengers Might or some generic trait would be the ideal follow-ups, preferably also on items with overwhelming power. But yeah, so we could be faced with like AM on our other pieces to amp up LD, but I'm not quite sure. Like that's kind of out in the dark.
There's a lot of like factors that it's a clusterfuck right now. Can I just say that? It's like that everything has an interaction. Like I believe Imperium Power is going to look a lot better when you're playing Zeal.
Or even Divine Judgment, yeah. But on the other hand, we've got traits like Indomitable Justice, Exberg, and this new one, I think it's called Treacherous Covenant. They're not going to be very good. Indomitable Justice on its own is just too weak and encourages weird shit like sniping low health targets. Though, I mean, it would probably be worth taking if Divine Judgment ever gets that speculated 50% buff. But without that, it's not going to go anywhere. And Divine Judgment, that's a topic on its own. What was the other one?
Yeah, just to add that, the Treacherous Covenant trait he mentioned, that's one of the new battle troll raid. I forget the name of it. The troll raid has its own troll traits, and that's one of them. It's while you're above 50% health, you have increased strength. And also while you're below a certain amount of health, you take increased damage. So it's a general trait, which is why it's included here. This is just the class traits, but there are new generic traits for the raid.
Yeah, and the big thing with Covenant, you actually take 15% extra damage below 20% health. You mentioned that, but that's big because that's often the difference between a health pot or health stone recovery, right? And I also have a sneaking suspicion that extra damage might be calculated into the hit if it were to take you below that threshold of damage. Kind of like how Divine Storm procs Divine Right at the moment. Also, if my memory is right, it tends to be Covenant tends to be present on Azerite gear that has very low quality or inconsistent damage mitigation or recovery effects. Like, what's that shield one? Resounding Protection?
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, and Impassive Visage. So, you'll have that to contend with. And I also believe it's also present on gear with suboptimal class traits as well. So really count yourself unlucky if you run into it. So really to kind of break that down, we're really left with only 4 class traits, and of those traits, half of them we don't want more than one. Whoops. Which of course, considering that 3 I just mentioned, we really narrow down what you could pick up as far as class traits is concerned. It's not going to be a fun time.
Yeah,
you
so
know.
we're getting all these great like gameplay changes right through these the new traits, because it's going to give you options for talents, and like if you hated when we told you to sim stuff before, you're going to hate it next week. But like you said, we have like 4 good traits, and half of them you don't want more than one of, and that is like a huge downside.
Mm-hmm. And not only that, there's another trait in there that has pedo zombie beckoning you for candy, and you got to run around to get a buff.
Oh,
so
man.
in all likelihood,
Yeah.
that's just going to be some bullshit mechanic to remind us how paraplegic we are. So that's what we've got to deal with.
Yep.
And it is a little bit annoying that the viability of many of our talents is going to hinge on having certain Azurite powers and class balancing through Azurite at this point, too.
Exactly.
Yep, all guides are pretty much going to be like, I don't know, sim it. Here's a bunch of different things that could happen, but really, like...
Yeah. Like,
Go
ahead.
Sorry. One last thing. These new traits are on virtually, like lights the Korean Imperium power, are on virtually every piece of siege gear, and on top of that, having both of the one-off traits is more common on this gear than a piece not having either at all, which kind of sucks.
Yeah, there is an abundance of gear that has these traits. It's kind of ridiculous.
At first, it's like, oh, good, because those traits seem really fun, and they're strong, so you want them. But then it's like, once you have one of each, and you keep getting pieces with, like, it feels bad, you know? So it's nice that we're getting some, like, flavor, but it sucks that it's coming through Azurite.
Yeah. There's also the other problem we've got to consider because of where these traits are actually located on the concentric rings themselves on the Azurite. The bad traits tend to occupy both first and second rings, so that creates a situation where it's quite likely that those pieces won't be ideal, because that really narrows down the third and fourth potential traits you could pick up, which essentially means you're going to be put into a situation where you're only able to choose one class trait or one generic trait, and it's quite likely the 2 generic traits that are probably worth anything in Siege are not going to be very good for us at the get-go.
And for people who have been like living in a hole for the past couple of months, in the next raid, the gear that drops from the raid, and I think from anything else, right, is going to have another ring on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what he's talking about.
Yeah, and speaking of other rings, I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole, but there was some 300 IQ Galaxy Brain decision on Blizzard's part to allow hybrid specs to only have one of the current T2, or I guess soon to be T3 traits, like overwhelming power and gut. So that's going to really narrow down the best possible piece of gear you could pick up, which could, in the end, enforce the idea that you really need to save your Titan Residuum for buying specific pieces off of the vendor, and likely, in fact, ignoring any gear that comes out of the raid because it just has too many combinations that are unfavorable.
So this is great news for people who love BizLit.
Oh, yeah.
And bad news for everyone else.
Exactly.
I'm really excited to basically be getting Wrath of the Ashbringer Realm. Woo!
Yeah, just to add to that, like he was saying, like the hybrid classes only have one trait in that tier ring. Like pure DPS specs, like rogues and hunters, they have a choice of 3 different DPS Azurite traits in that ring, so they pretty much always get a good one.
Yes. Yes, there's always something they can walk away with without feeling really bad. Whereas if you're a Ret Paladin, you pick up On My Way and something else really shitty, and you're like, okay, this thing goes in the bin right away. You don't even need to think about it.
Yep.
But on the other hand, really, LD and EP could get meaningful tuning in the next couple weeks or leading up to the raid, and everything I just said won't fucking matter. So
There's a whole lot
that's a
of who
possibility.
knows right now. Even as things stand right now, there's too many variables for us to say this is what is going to be the popular thing, or this is what's.
Yeah, we were joking the other day when I was talking to you about updating your guide. You should just put like the shrugging emoji, and that'll be the whole guide.
Yeah, that's what it really feels like. Like it felt that way in the beta, where it was like, oh, we're gonna have all of these choices, which seems great, but also like, what are we gonna tell people? But like, I figured that it would work itself out, and it kind of has. Everybody's basically running the same talent build, the same Azurite, which is whatever you were lucky enough to get your hands on. But next week, I don't really know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, next week it's not going to be so bad. Like the logic is like I think I hinted at, but like the logic really just breaks down: get your LD and your EP trade, and the third one doesn't really. If so long as that third trade you're picking up isn't again one of those two trades, you'll be fine.
And if you haven't made yourself familiar with the talent comparison part of the Top Gear on raid bots, you probably should. Because that's another thing, like what, we were saying that basically DP, Inquisition, and Crusade might see the light of it. So get ready for that too.
Yeah, just what we're kind of seeing, like for a while, Blizzard, their philosophy was you shouldn't have to look at a guide or use a third-party tool to figure out what gear to use. You should be using the higher item level gear. And that's something they struggled with throughout Legion, with rings being a very big discrepancy with secondary stats. And going into BFA now, it's still an issue. Like initially in BFA, a lot of those Azurite trades, the tooltips were absolutely useless. They had no numerical information. So you were forced to go to third-party sites to look up information. And to add on top of that, we now have these new rings. We're having multiple combinations. Whereas as much as Blizzard wants people to be able to pick gear inside the game, they're making it increasingly harder to do so.
It feels like they are just trying to throw so much at you that you're just like, whatever, I guess we'll just do this because this looks interesting. But really what happens is you're just going to copy paste your string, throw it into raid bots, and select every single option available to you and just do what it spits out. Which is, I don't think what their intent was.
No, but I mean, inevitably, it was going to come to that. Like,
of course it was. Yep.
It's just at this point that there's a clear delineation between what is good and what is bad, and how those good factors interact with the talents or fight you're facing.
I mean,
that's going to be a really hard question to solve. And
yeah, there's really just there's two different things that could happen here. I mean, either your choices matter or they don't. If your choices don't matter, you don't have to sim anything. If they do matter,
yeah, and it's very much going to matter this next year. A lot of people look at this Divine Storm buff as being positive, and largely it is, but it has one major drawback, and that because Divine Storm deals more damage, you're going to want to cast it on 2 targets now. And that also creates a situation, or a broad set of situations, where casting it on 2 targets is more beneficial more often. So in actual effect, yes, you're getting more cleave and AE output, but what's also happening on the flip side here is you're doing less single target damage more often. And this is a problem because our only current niche in which we perform well is single target damage. And going into the patch, they're essentially doing a role reversal of this. So we're going to be great at cleave and AoE, but we're going to be poor at single target damage. And coincidentally, or perhaps not so coincidental, Divine Judgment is really, really undertuned. And that would be the one saving grace we could have while still having some cleave and some AoE and good single target. But without that, we're kind of resigned to the single one-trick pony stand. And this also creates talent issues elsewhere, but I guess we can cover that.
Yeah, and like even in Uldir, like so much of it is 2 targets, but there's one target that you really want to be focusing on. Like Vectis, you want to kill that ad, right?
Mhm.
So like you have to battle with, I could be using Divine Storm here, but that ad needs, and that feels just as bad to me as like being forced into single target only, because at least I'm good at that.
Hmm. Yeah, in actual fact, it doesn't actually change anything going from this patch to the next. The same logic breakdown will occur. It'll be a question of whether should this Aya die faster or can I get away with cleaving? And more often than not, the answer is going to be this ad should die faster. But that also creates a problem in that nothing really changes going into the next patch because we're going to be doing essentially the same thing.
Yep.
Unless, of course, they introduce the talent diversity necessary to actually include some variation, like buffing divine judge.
Yep, and then we get to join the party of, well, when I AoE, I do more single target damage, Mr. Ray.
Exactly. And that would
Which is
be a
not bad.
great niche to have, but
Yeah.
we don't have it at all. We're a hybrid class that's billed as a jack of all trades that does one fucking thing, and that's it.
Yep.
So it's actually really frustrating to me to see that continue when so many gameplay problems at this point, to me at least, are self-evident that could be fixed just by some number tuning. Like you see a lot of these posts on the forums about people complaining about that red isn't working. You know, I hate this gameplay. What's really happening is they're actually just locked into one rule set that governs what they do. They don't really have any choice to change what they're doing, and that's a problem. And that's not something that can be, that's not something that requires some sweeping changes to the class. It's just simple numerical tuning. That's it, and it can solve all of our problems.
Yep. I mean, there's a couple things they could do, right? Is like, not have the judgment debuff on one target would be nice. But mostly it feels like numbers. And then they go in and they do actually change Divine Storm, and then they add these new traits. And it's like, okay, is this is really the path you've chosen? Because this kind of sucks.
Yeah. And I mean, all in all, like if you look at it as half a problem solved, what they've added isn't bad. In fact, I think it's like a huge step in the right direction. They just didn't go with full measure. They went with half measures.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually, in actual effect, made us worse off in a lot of ways than it did prior.
As much as like we're bitching, I am still excited. I am still hopeful. Perhaps that's because, I don't know, this is the trap we all fall into, but I think it's gonna be, I think they still have some poking around to do, but I think we're gonna be just fine.
Yeah, come Tuesday or Wednesday, I think we'll definitely, with those new traits, we'll have a little bit of more appreciation for playing the class than we do now.
Yes.
It'll be something new, and it's something impactful.
Yes. Yeah, the patch will absolutely bring a DPS increase for Paladins. Like, you could see on average a 5% increase in your DPS going from 8.0 to 8.1. And that's going to be pretty big, especially on single target fights where we're already pretty good, where we can just stand still and bash something.
And if you're the type of person who's like, ICC was the glory days, or you just liked that, like, mixing in Divine Storm, like, you're gonna love that,
You're gonna like this if that's your favorite gameplay.
Like it kind of seems like we're going, unfortunately, through Azurite, which we're going more in the direction of like actually what people have wanted from Ret, So.
And yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, they're clearly listening to our complaints.
Yes, as much as people like bitch that Blizzard doesn't listen, like, just look at.
Before we get too far here, we did have the chart for AoE as well, which I wanted to show. So
right. You made all those charts. We should probably look at them.
Yeah, so this is using Hectic Ad Cleave, so you can see in AoE how strong these traits get compared to our other ones. As you can see, Imperium Power is just a fucking monster.
Is this still using RV or?
It is. This is still using Righteous Verdict too.
Oh god. Oh yeah. So you essentially don't have, not that Zeal is great, but it's better than not having a talent in that tier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing is, when you're looking at AOE, and you're looking at these variables on their own, none of the tier 15 talents would have an effect on this breakdown. This is just how awesome these traits are.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean it's great,
Yeah, although it is nice that
hard
there's
not
going to be more opportunities to actually employ cleave and AoE style builds, just
Mhm.
because Zeal will start getting a lot more play. It's nice to see more talent diversity.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. But more realistically, though, this Divine Storm tune-up, and this kind of a side rant, but this Divine Storm tune-up effectively kills the entire tier 15 row, unless of course they decide to take some action to prop up, a Righteous Verdict and ES, which I don't feel like they're going to do this patch cycle. So the
Yeah.
realistic choice going forward is just to take Zeal for every.
Take the
Yeah,
passive
it's
talent.
likely going to change that Zeal is the default choice, and then you'll take Righteous Verdict. It's a turret fight. Whereas the reverse is true. Right now, Righteous Verdict is the default. You take Zeal if I just can't hit the boss. What do I do?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just right here, I'll turn on the other ranks as well. So you can see once we add a second rank, again, like, we're going from an 11.8% increase to the second rank is only a 2.8% gain. We had a third rank, it's the same deal. And like Souls mentioned earlier, it's like these stacking charts can be deceptive. So what you want to look for in charts like this is you might think, oh, this is 3 of Imperium power, so I want 3 Imperium power traits. And that's not the answer. What you gotta do is pay attention to that DPS gain per rank. So you see the first rank here is worth 11.78%. That second rank is worth 2.8%. So what you'd want to do is you'd want to take any other trait that would give you more than a 2.8% DPS increase. If we go through here, we can go up a little bit. Like Avenger's Might, 2.84%. That would be better than a second rank of Imperium Power. Our Relentless Inquisitor, 3.3, 3.4%, depending on talents. That's a much better second trait than having a second rank of Imperium Power. And the same for Light's Decree. You can see it's like
At least on...
It's a little bit different here in AoE with Light's Decree, but it's very diminished compared to what it is for the first rank.
And at least on single target, it really is like any other Azerite trait. Pretty much any other Azerite trait is better than a second rank in the new.
Yeah.
Which sucks.
Yeah, and on the flip side, when you're looking at Light's Decree through an AoE perspective, you got to remember that effect only impacts your damage output while you're in wings. So in actual effect, 75-80% of the time, Light's Decree isn't doing anything for you in these situations.
Yeah, so it's like what they've done with this is like they've tried to take the tier system and the legendary and artifact system, and they try to put it all together, So they're having like gameplay changes baked into these pieces that you're not necessarily gonna have access to, and I think that's where my big problem is. Or you're gonna have too much access to, since it's a gameplay change.
Yeah, both, really.
The second stack is, it's just gonna be slight numbers, and if they tune that up too high, it's gonna be broken. And if they have it too low, like it is now, it's gonna feel really bad to have a second stack.
Mm-hmm. Well, realistically, I don't know why they don't assign the scaling variables of these traits to the second and third tiers of those ranks. So, for example, on Imperium Power, the first rank you get would simply just provide a free Divine Storm, and then successive ranks would provide the damage increase. That would help spread out the power of those traits without throwing all the power on that one-off effect, which is what we're seeing here.
Yeah, so hopefully they fix that a little bit, because as it stands now, having two of any or of either of those is gonna feel pretty shitty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one thing a lot of people are thinking that Imperium Power and Light's Decree are fixing our cleave, our AoE, and you can't think of it that way, because like Souls mentioned, like for Light's Decree, that's tied to our wings. If it's a fight that has intermittent adds, if those adds aren't up during our wings, there's no benefit to our cleave there. And the same for Imperium Power. If we don't have a proc when those adds are alive, that doesn't do anything for our cleave. It's something that ends up being nice to have if it happens. Or if you're actually in a heavy AoE scenario like a dungeon where it's reliable, it's okay, but like an actual raid fight where ads tend to be short-lived and not usually long-living, these traits shouldn't be viewed as this is a fix to our problems.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like cool gameplay changes that are happening that maybe shouldn't be happening this way, but that's a personal opinion.
Yeah, the best thing in realistic terms that these traits are doing is adding another baseline proc and fixing the balance problems on the 100 tier.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, once you have Light's Decree and Imperium Power, you can take any 100 talent and do just as well as anyone else that's taking another. But more importantly, these actually add some level of diversity to those talents as well. Like Divine Purpose and the Imperium Power combo is going to greatly increase our AoE output on average. Whereas on the flip side, Light's Decree is also going to increase our damage dealt during Crusade. And that's going to be really strong on fights with intermittent downtimes in between those Crusade usages, which is absolutely going to be huge for us.
You're going to have to know where each talent has its strength, right? So, like you said, you're not going to want to take Divine Purpose if you're trying to burst down ads every 2 minutes, you know?
Right.
You're not going to want to take Crusade, well, I mean, to each their own, but it's not going to be, you're going to want to take that in like a burst situation where you really need to burst.
Yes.
Which is great because we have options, but it also means that you need to have a little bit more knowledge up in your noggin.
Yeah, it's nice to have choices. It does complicate the class a little bit, which I would argue the class could use a little complication. And I guess we're going to have to carry around tomes again now.
God, I'm so bad at talent changing because just like for so long, it's just here's the cookie cutter. But it might change once you get more gear, but here it is.
Yeah, and that's another thing these talents are doing is they actually shift a lot of the skill required to perform the best in these certain talent builds dramatically. So before, it would have typically been like Inquisition and Hammer of Wrath with Wake of Ashes that would provide the most DPS. But now that's kind of shifting to Divine Purpose now that Imperium Power is in the picture and we have the Judgment mechanic. You know, you can't just dance on your keyboard and you spend these procs because using one proc over another when Judgment is present is actually really important and can lead to really big gains. So there is some finesse in using Divine Purpose now that previously wasn't there in the past. So that's great.
Yeah, it also ties in the fact where when you have both Divine Purpose and Imperium Power up at the same time, you're not consuming Divine Purpose first.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were to use your Divine Storm there, it would eat your Imperium Power proc, and that proc could have potentially procced your Divine Purpose. But because you didn't spend it first, you might want to use that Templor's Verdict first to get rid of the Divine Purpose, and then you could use your Imperium Power proc. There's a bit of nuance in there.
And then aside from this stuff, I would argue that there's going to be a bigger discrepancy now between, you know, what is optimal and what is going to put out the biggest numbers and what your rate, if you know what I'm saying. You know?
Oh yeah, there absolutely is going to be a discrepancy.
We're kind of... Go ahead.
From a player skill perspective, I don't think that's bad. I think that's healthy for the game.
Yes, of course.
There's got to be some differentiation there that delineates who is who. You know?
Yep.
I mean, I'm not sure if anyone's ever done this before, but if you take Simulation Craft and just delete that whole API and just put in, okay, dance over your keyboard, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's like a 5% DPS loss.
Yeah, current. But I mean, I imagine if you were to do the same thing next patch, you would see maybe a 10% DPS.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. It's adding additional elements of skill to the game. So
Yeah.
good gameplay is rewarded, making good choices is rewarded. This is overwhelmingly positive changes, despite how much complaining we're doing.
And you
Mhm.
joke that that's small, but it's actually pretty big compared to other classes. Like 5%. A 5% difference between optimal rotation and like potato root is pretty big for BFA.
Yeah, the potato rotation for Demon Hunter actually is optimal for the most.
Jesus. Well, I guess that's not very
That was a
spread.
fun time because everybody was doing that for a while, and Rhett actually had a pretty big. But yeah, Demon Hunters were literally like within 1% with their real APL and their potato APL. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, but-
definitely a side tangent.
Yeah, so
Don't they
guess which
have,
raid
like,
spot I
3
opted to take in Rebs.
Yeah, and one thing that you'll see that we talk about a lot is like we're talking about certain pain points or issues we have. Like we have good single target, but we don't have good AoE or cleave, or we have bad mobility. We have this problem. We have that problem. A lot of times, what you'll see is if we talk about a problem that we have, there's another spec that has that same problem, but that individual problem is a lot more relevant to their performance. So a lot of times when we do try to bring up things that are really affecting us, we kind of get drowned out by these other classes that have these same individual problems, where we have just a combination of all these small problems that get drowned out.
Yeah, it's very hard to get the correct message out there, or at least one that's more representative of the actual grievances players have, and then having them listen to it. And even then, there's just absolutely no guarantee they'll do anything, because what the solution might be would conflict with their design goals or philosophy that was outlined when they designed the spec for whatever expansion.
You know, it's like one thing, like you could have great feedback, but that great feedback does not fit their design goals, so they can't do it. We don't know what their restrictions are, so we just have to hope.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like that would be part of the reason why Divine Judgment isn't getting the attention that it clearly needs. I mean, there's a discrepancy there in how good it is compared to the other two. I mean, we even saw Consecration get a buff up to Wake of Ashes this patch cycle, so it's like, why is Divine Judgment left out? There's a clear factor here that could lead to it being desirable, or is there something else in play? Like, I've seen burst concerns cited from them as a reason why it doesn't want to get pushed up too high. But on the other hand, there's also other solutions to that problem, in that you could tackle Azerite traits that kind of rein that in. Like, one solution to limiting the burst potential of Divine Judgment is to look at Indomitable Justice and go, okay, do we really need this delta to deal max damage for this trait from a health discrepancy? Well, no, you really don't. In fact, with that delta, it actually creates a lot of problems. So one possible solution that you could apply that could get a broad fix and a more reasonable balance on Divine Judgment is to just tune in Indomitable Justice's delta. You know, you could cut down the damage required for maximum output, or the health difference required for maximum output by 50%, and then cut down the damage done, the maximum damage potential accordingly. And that would both make it more desirable for Divine Judgment and allow that trade to be more usable in broad terms when you're not taking that talent, because of what I said earlier. It's just creating too many problems with the gameplay itself, like sniping low health targets to get the most out of it. Which, on the other hand, also creates the issue of, if you're hitting a low health target, there's the possibility that judgment debuff you're throwing on that target isn't getting consumed because the mob is either dying as a result of that hit or dies shortly. So it's just this really janky gameplay aspect that just doesn't really jive with what else is going on.
Yeah, which is honestly a really good summary for Rethos expansion. It's just a lot of like, oh, this seems cool, mixed into a pot, and it doesn't necessarily taste good.
Exactly. Like, you can see what they're going for. You can clearly see it. And it's like, yes, I can get behind this. This is awesome. But this, the sum of the parts don't add up in a nice way.
Yeah, the best thing, like, look at when we first, for Wowhead, they asked us what we thought about Rhett. We were all super excited early BFA, and as you can see, as we've gotten here, like, we had a great base model, but now it's stuck in that base model. It hasn't really improved either direction from that.
Yeah.
The parts are there, they're just not mixed right.
I believe I said something very catty about that in the first one, because it really was kind of scary. It's like, oh, this looks like all of the things that we want. Like, how are they going to fuck this up?
I mean, it's not an unreasonable approach. I mean, I wouldn't attribute malice to everything outright, but
No.
assuming
so
there's the potential for them to get completely, it's reasonable to assume it's possible.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's malice at all. I think it's a bunch of people who are just as excited as we are, and they're just like, wouldn't this be great? And they just add it to the pot, you know?
Yeah.
And that doesn't always work. Red kind of, I tell people, feels like a meme of itself right now, and hopefully it looks like after 8.1 it's going to feel less so.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully. I mean, maybe
Hopefully.
they'll hotfix in some shit that fixes a bunch of talent problems, and then we're golden. And then we can really go from there. But so long as we have those factors in place that are just tantalizing, saying, you could have this, you know, it's just going to drive people nuts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about Ret in 8.1, and I'm just at the back of my mind, I'm thinking, like, oh, how is this going to go horribly wrong? This is too good to be true.
That's just because you've been hurt so many times over the years. We're all in that boat, my friend.
That's a healthy dose of skepticism.
And I think I would say to people, like, it's the same cycle we go through every expansion, you know, and by the second half of the expansion, things have, like, leveled out, and it's fine. But for now, we're kind of on the fun roller coaster. I don't know if it's unique to us, of, like, getting really excited and really disappointed over and over. But things will level out.
Coaster of emotion.
And to add to that, what kind of sucks is like once we get to that halfway point, we're in an okay spot. But you know what happens at that halfway point? We get the alpha for the next expansion. We can see how everything has gone to hell in a handbasket, and we have to start from scratch. So we only get a short time to enjoy that state.
Oh my god!
And then it's gone. Like here,
and then the fight starts again.
Yeah, like here, they're adding Imperium power in Light's Decree. Those are asteroid traits. Asteroids going bye-bye next expansion. So we're back to square one.
Yep, and all of us, you know, see that first wave alpha go out, and we're just like, this time I'm gonna take a step back because I don't want to fall in the trap again, and then we just all fall in the trap again.
But that's the tragedy, though. I mean, that's a reasonable expectation that they might want to just go back to the drawing. And the tragedy for me here is that I think a lot of players recognize that they've struck gold on some level here, and that they might just throw that away instead of iterating on what's already there. That has me concerned.
Yep.
Yeah,
for me, it's like... No, you.
Yeah, it's like the BFA philosophy, what Ion stated was that rather than trying to keep on fixing everyone's weaknesses, they wanted to double down on their strengths. And what's happening here, a lot of our strength is coming from Azerite traits. So once those Azerite traits are gone, is there going to be a new direction for the next expansion? What's their new direction? Do they want to revert back on that and make everyone good at everything? Or are they going to use that new system that they introduced? Assuming it impacts gameplay, what's it going to do to us? Do we have to keep on relying on expansion systems to fix our problems, or will we have something base that's functional?
You can assume they're going to overcorrect next expansion, because that's all they do. So they're just going to... My expectation is they're going to go from what we had this expansion, which is every class needs to have a weakness and a strength. Everyone has to have a niche, to, like, we understand that feels bad, and we're going to kind of have more homogenized gameplay, I think, next expansion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what we really have here is, if you look at 8.0, we didn't really have a niche. We were just a jack of all trades that did everything okay, right? But in this patch, there's a clear distinction of what we do good and what we're not so good at. And what we are good at is kind of moving back to what we had in Legion, where we're really cooldown dependent. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it really worked out for us in Nighthold. It is a bad thing, however, when you can't have the options, which is what we had in Tomb of Sargeras. But the tuning is such now that we have an option to shift away from cooldowns into either Inquisition or Divine Purpose, and that's going to be huge for us. We have the flexibility, but we don't have the all-encompassing flexibility that we need to truly be a jack of all trades, and that's primarily single target damage now, and that could be potentially really damaging for us.
It really is going to depend on the raid. Like, are our strengths gonna stand out?
Then it comes down to how desirable melee is. Then you factor in a lot of the melee.
Yeah.
They bring that class buff or raid debuff, and are we good? Or are we great? Like, are they gonna take the classes that are great, or are they gonna take the classes that's okay?
Yeah, I mean, I have a feeling Rep will be used next year, but we'll still see what we saw in Waldir, in that melee is really restricted and multi-dot classes are really valued. And you can see that on essentially all fights. Like, if you really wanted to push it, you could just bring rogues and multi-daughters next year and you'd be fine. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if on some level that's what World First Guilds are going to do. But aside from that, Ret should be a lot better next year, and it will be desirable on some level.
At the end of the day, Ret is still going to be viable for 99% of the player base.
Oh yeah, absolutely, as it is now. But
as it always will be and always has been.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
except for tier 11.
It's sort of a trickle down effect of the community perception. We'll see the top 3 does one thing, the top 5 copies them, the next 10 copy them, and it just kind of works its way down. So even though like we are viable, there are Rets in the Hall of Fame, there are Rets in like the top 20 kills. But they don't see Ret that often, or they just see the Ret memes. So everyone kind of assumes that, oh, it must not be good, and that just trickles down through the ranks.
Exactly, and that's what we've dealt with through Aldir. But I mean, some of it, a lot of that criticism levied against our spec was warranted, because there's a lot of things we can't do well, but those things we couldn't do well are just problems that Blizzard took on the initial pass of the spec in 8.0 that just didn't really jive with reality. Like, Divine Storm on 3 targets, like, what was the principal driving reason behind that, when in the end, all classes could cleave fine and we couldn't for some reason? Like, at that point, if I was one of their designers, I would have been like, okay, this clearly isn't working, let's hotfix this Divine Storm damage now, so we can at least preemptively shove off some of the problems that the spec is having. But instead, they opted to just leave it as it was, and now we have an entire community of people on suicide watch. So,
yeah, it kind of feels like it was our intended weakness was supposed to be we're not good at 2-target cleave. Guess what the whole raid is?
Yep.
Exactly.
The combination of what our weakness is and how the encounter design worked in Aldir really works pretty strongly against them.
The stars aligned in the wrong fucking way.
Yeah, and especially in, you want to bring max 5 melee to everything. And there are melee that bring a buff. How many spots are left? That's what I say is to people is like, Ret is not really the problem. There's just not room for melee. And unfortunately, why would you bring a Ret Paladin when you can bring a rogue? And people say, well, rogues weren't that great. And it's like, well, the perception of rogues was high, so people are going to fill their spots with rogues.
Yeah, fact is, you need to have a warrior, you need to have a demon hunter, and you need to have a monk in melees. Who's going to be in those last 2 spots? Is it going to be somebody who's bad?
It's not going to be a Ret Paladin. And if you have the option, it's just going to be more ranged.
Yeah, I don't even want to get started on the logic that they set out initially for raid buffs. It's fucking baffling that they somehow thought a class with Rallying Cry, the strongest fucking defensive cooldown in the game, somehow needed also the strongest offensive melee buff in the game. When you have another class, like Ret and Enhance, that don't bring shit. So it's like, are they really trying here, or is they just throwing darts at a board and hoping something sticks?
One of the more baffling changes I found from 8.1, actually, looking at the GCD changes. Oh, you know what Demon Hunters really needed? More mobility.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a pain point for Demon Hunters. They should be able to move faster, I think.
Yeah, which is funny. If our specialty is being good at one target, why is our mobility bad? If a new target that's priority spawns, we have to get to that target and we're slow. That's just devaluing our niche.
Because that is our strength, is bursting down one thing.
Our strength is bursting down one thing if it spawns inside the boss's hitbox.
Yep. You'd think that fetid would be great, but it's not because you have to move.
Oh, yep. That fight is something else. Like, I don't even feel like I could make a real argument around Rhett on that fight, because somehow they thought this is going to be a wonderful fight, everybody's going to love it, and everything's going to just be peachy. It's just one of those fights that's like, this happened, let's never do this again.
Yep. Also, like, let's make giant debuffs that can't overlap and only 2 of them fit across. And everybody has to run around.
Further emphasizing the movement. So you would think that, okay, this is the movement fight for the tier. So we kind of check that box. And then you move to Gahoon, another fight that's just takes place in this massive fucking room, and they want to throw in another movement check, which can be a pain point for us if you're not taking Cavalier, which you might not need to, but it's just they tried to do the same thing so many times in that instance. I feel like it's Tuma Sargeras syndrome, where they did the same thing over and over and over again on all fights, and they didn't really communicate between the teams on what's going on. Or rather, they tuned and designed the fights after classes had been redesigned, so there's just nothing in concert with what the game is actually like.
Yeah, which is really disappointing, because one of the things that was directly asked, like, what about going to BFA? Are we going to see more interaction between the class design team and the counter design team? And the answer looks to be no, but they said it would be.
Yeah, it looks like it's a resounding no. This couldn't be more evidence for more of an opposite than anything other they could. And it looks like that might continue a bit in Siege, but it's hard to tell. There's some fights where we're clearly going to be good at, and others where it's going to be, fed to devour. But I guess we can hope that as a spec, the fights we're good at lines up in the latter half of the instance, because if that's true and the spec is desirable, then that'll create a ripple effect throughout the community where, okay, the spec is desirable, so people should bring it, and that might bring players away from the ledge. But it's too hard to tell right now, and I think that would be a huge factor in determining whether people actually end up playing Red or not, and viewing it in a positive.
I'm hoping for the best and preparing for the worst.
Alright, so we're going to move on to our log review here. We'll come back. We'll answer some questions in chat later. So if you have any questions you want answered, you can ask them in chat now. We'll get to them. But every week we do have a person for a log review. And we do have a winner this week, so we'll go over their log here. Alright, so I have it pulled up on my screen now. Our winner was Liberon or Liberon. I'm not exactly sure how his name is said, so I apologize. It's been the case a lot with these log reviews. So he gave us a Zul heroic fight that he wanted to look at. So the first thing that we usually do is we go to their name, we go to the summary, then we see what they got. So first up here is the talents. For the most part, the talents are standard. He did take Divine Purpose though. And if we look at his Azurite powers, they're pretty standard, but he also took Divine Right. So definitely a bit of a wild card there. And as far as his gear goes, he has most of his gear enchanted and gemmed. He has a lower level enchant on one of his rings, and actually on his back. His back has a socket, but there's no gem in it. And I checked the logs from this night. He didn't get this as a drop in raid, so he forgot to put a gem in his cloak before he came to raid. So always remember to check your gems, or maybe carry a few on hand if you need to. And the next thing that you usually go over is want to make sure they are prepared with all their pre-raid stuff. Again, White Analyzer is a good tool for that. It has that be well prepared section. It mentions the high quality enchants. And we can see here, there wasn't a pre-potion used, and there wasn't food used. Again, it is a heroic log. Maybe they didn't think it was they needed it or wanted to save some money, but if you are going to try to do as much DPS as you possibly can do, you want to make sure you use all the tools that you have available to you and resources. So one of the most common things that we look at is the opener. Sometimes you can use the opener as a gauge of how well the person understands the spec. Now, nowadays the opener isn't so much make or break, but we'll talk about that more later as well, because next patch will be fun. So as of right now, the opener isn't really a make or break scenario, but it's good to see if the opener is being done properly here. And what we can see is they opened up right away. They went Wings Wake, which is not ideal.
It's technically like not a giant loss, but opening with Blade and Judgment is just a good habit to have because it's better with the other 100.
Yes, especially on a fight like Zool, where you could do both of those things while you're running in, and then you could Avenging Wrath and fire off those Divine Storms or Templar's Verdicts.
Yeah, the reason why it's so important we want to do that for all of our openers, we always open up with Blade then Judge, or Judge then Blade, with Blade being ideal, is that we revolve around our cooldowns, so we want our cooldowns to be recharging at all times. So rather than open up with a large cooldown like Wake, which also isn't reduced by haste, we can take advantage of using Blade and Judgment first. And the reason the guides say Blade over Judgment is that because if you were to use a Judgment first and then Blade, they would both come off cooldown at the same time and make a cooldown clash, which you want to avoid. But again, the random nature of Art of War or Blade of Wrath, if you use it, can help offset that a bit as well.
Mm-hmm. But other than that, looking at these event timelines, his rotation was actually executed pretty. It's hard to find instances where he really did screw. Where the problems lie here is not from his rotation so much, but his ability to take advantage of some of the effects that he has present, like Divine Right. And what really stuck out to me is he was not taking every opportunity to snipe the low HP Krogs or Blood Hexers that were present to get a Divine Right buff up. And that can lead to some really huge gains. And furthermore, towards the end of the fight, the other big mistake that this guy made was not using Divine Right sub 20%, which is actually something you want to do with at least one rank in most cases, unless of course that Divine Right piece is on your lowest item level piece of gear, then it might not be worth it. But from this, it looks like it actually was. So that is something you want to do. But that is kind of superfluous information because come Tuesday, that's never going to be a problem we run in. But that would have been something you should have considered, which isn't terrible, but it would have created pretty big gains for you.
I think it's just a good opportunity to point out, like, if you have problems keeping these buffs up or anything like that, like, find a solution. Be it like a weak aura that's just an image, or something that like literally screams at you when you can use it and it's, so regardless of the trait being gone, like, find tools to be better at the things you saw.
Yeah, if you're going to be taking some weird procs, make sure you have a mechanism to remind you to actually take advantage of that weird proc, or just don't.
Mm-hmm.
And what's also possibly likely here is that because this is only heroic, those ads might have died so fast where taking a trait like Divine Right just doesn't make sense on heroic.
Yeah, that's entirely possible depending on the DPS of the rest of your... But at that point, what you could really do is just keep your pecker in your pants, and wait to use Divine Right at the right moment, or Divine Storm at the right moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is by no means a bad log. In fact, this is actually a really good log. It's just it could have been almost perfect.
Yeah, like mentioned, like
And-
his actual rotation, it was pretty good. He was
Oh, bang
prioritizing
on,
his
yeah.
blade over his judge consistently. There wasn't really any downtime. He has that part down pretty good, but there was just a couple small things there. And using WoW Analyzer, it'll show a few things here. Like we can see judgments consumed. A few of his judgments didn't get consumed. He might have used them like on a Hexer or a Krog or the Crusher, and it might have died before he got that judgment debuff. And the judgment debuff overall is a good portion of the damage. And if you miss a few of those there, that could have been like 100 DPS or so that he lost from missing a few of them, or 3 of them in this case.
Yeah, and we don't know the quality of his raid. You know, like he might have felt compelled to throw a judgment on something that was going to die because it needed to die or whatever. You know.
Mhm.
Yes, that's a possibility.
Also, he was using Righteous Verdict, which is go ahead.
I was just going to mention Righteous Verdict.
Go ahead then.
Yeah, there's a rule of thumb, a rough rule of thumb you can employ when deciding to use Righteous Verdict over, say, Zeal, which realistically is the only other option you would logically run into, is if Righteous Verdict uptime in a log is below 70%, there's a very high probability that just running Zeal would be superior, because you do actually need a high, consistent uptime on Righteous Verdict, especially during points of high output like Divine Right being up or cooldown. That's where it really starts to shine. And if you can't do that, then you might actually just be better off taking Zeal.
It doesn't have to drop pretty low for you to want Zeal raid. I think people right now will be like, I Divine Stormed one time on Heroic Zekvos because we got ads. Should I take Zeal? And it's like, probably not.
Yeah, because realistically, your uptime is probably going to exceed 85, 90%. And in that case, just stick with Righteous Verdict.
Yeah, as we can see here, he had 75%, or his total damage was 3.13%, which that's right at the edge of whether Zeal would have been better or not is questionable, but it's just something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on a fight like Zul, you really want to commit to doing one thing really well. Like, if you're going to be a cleavy boy, commit to being a cleavy boy. If you're going to tunnel the boss, commit to tunneling the boss. Don't try and do both unless you're a
Yeah, but for Shield of Vengeance, he used all the Shield of Vengeances. Each one was absorbed on Zul. It's very easy to absorb those, like on the Dark Revelations that go off when they explode. That's probably what he did. I didn't check, but he used them all. One of his Art of War procs, he sat on Blade for quite a while, so it kind of got wasted there, so you want to avoid that as much as possible. He didn't get lucky with the Ret Buff Lottery. He got a grand total of 6 DPS, which feels bad.
It is heroic, though. If he got more than that, I'd be suspicious.
But one thing that also, like Souls mentioned, target sniping with Divine Storm on those low health Krogs, but also comes into play with Hammer of Wrath, is you can snipe those Krogs with Hammer of Wrath to get that more holy power in your rotation. There wasn't much of that, or any of that in the fight. He was pretty much using it only in wings, and only when the targets were below 20%. So if you're looking around the room, if you make a mouse over macro, or you want to target one of those Krogs when they're low, you can fill in your rotation downtime with those Hammer Wraths on those targets.
And if he's not going to be doing that, honestly, I would have said that he would be better off not taking Hammer of Wrath, especially because he's taking Divine Purpose.
Yeah.
Like if you're not going to throw out extra hammers, then might as well not complicate things more.
Yeah, then in that case, just go with Blade of Wrath.
Yeah, and for his trinkets, he used the syringe, and he didn't get that much uptime on syringe. He was at 17.71%, which is pretty low. Usually you want around 25%. And if we look at his damage here, we can see he had the wasting infection, which is the dot that gets put on the targets, was once on Zul and a Blood Hexer and a Crusher. So it shows he was switching to those targets, and when he target swapped to those ads, his trinket procced, and they died before he got full use of the benefit. So target swapping can really kill the value of that syringe severely. This is a case where it hurt him with his trinket choice.
Yes. In realistic
Hey,
terms, this is
Red,
part
you
of the
want to talk
reason
about
why.
getting you cut of death? I know that's your favorite sword.
Yeah, no, but I mean, it's the same thing there. Like, you have to take into account, are you target swapping with things that are not very good for target swapping? I do it too, just because, like, I forget to change gear. I'm worried about other shit during raid, but, like, it is a thing that we should all get in the habit of, like, does this make sense for this fight?
Mhm.
And maybe that's all he has,
Yeah, it's entirely possible that's all he has. But
Even still, like, it would be acceptable for him to just stay on. So, like Thor said, if you're trying to do one thing, then commit to it, So if he's going to be committing to being a cleavy boy, then he should just hang out on Zool and be a cleavy boy, not let that thing drop.
yes.
Yeah, and one thing we mentioned earlier is that for talents he chose to find purpose, he could have used Inquisition. So we went ahead and looked at his other logs. There is actually one fight, as actually from this night on Talak. He actually used Inquisition. So I just want to mention it here. We'll go to his opener. And you can see he used that same opener. And it also shows he has a different trinket. He has that Dig Deep, or that PvP trinket. So he could have used this instead of his syringe. And also on a fight like Zulf, those ads, that primary stat first window, you would do insane burst damage on Zul with that versus his syringe. It would have been a lot more DPS for him. But we
I
can
will
see
throw out
here,
as a disclaimer, though, like, they might have just pulled and he was, like, not ready or something.
maybe, it's always possible.
Who knows?
Yeah, but what we can see here is that he used the same opener. He went Wings, then Wake, and this time instead of using Divine Storm, he used Inquisition. So you never want to cast your Inquisition during your Wing. So this comes down to the opener again. You want to do that Blade and Judge, or Judge and Blade. And then you would, in this case, you would use Inquisition, and then you would go into your Wings and Wake.
And I think we were speculating that we think he might be using Hikuli or had used it.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. Where with Hikili, it doesn't show the opener properly, so you really have to know your opener.
That'd be a good thing to get on Hikili. You might be interested in knowing that. Imagine you could fix that.
Yeah,
It doesn't read sequences, so
yeah, he's trying to right now. He's thinking about it, how to do it. Like you can make it like a table, but what happens if someone breaks that sequence? Like, should he break the sequence on the add-on for the person, or what should he do? He's kind of debating on how he can handle it. Because if someone goes out of the way to not follow that sequence, then it gets turned off, and it's a little bit of us. Looks like Thor dropped out there. I don't know if he had to go.
yeah,
maybe.
his internet cut out. He said he's trying.
Okay.
But yeah, we do recommend Hikuli like a lot, but it also is important that you know the class. Like you can't just plug and play, basically.
Like after the first few seconds of the fight, then you can kind of plug and play, but you gotta pay attention still.
You still need to make good choices. Like, it's always going to recommend you use Wake on cooldown. But if you know up in your big brain that there's going to be ads real soon, then you're going to want to hold on to it. And those are things like you should know.
Yeah, like on Zool, the Krogs, it lines up with the Krogs pretty well when they spawn.
Mm-hmm.
But you might have to delay a few seconds each time. And also, just as a note for Inquisition, like, he used it one time, so maybe he didn't like using it, or maybe he wasn't very comfortable using it. But using the WoW Analyzer will actually pop it in there. You get an error sometimes when opening a log from a new page. I'm not sure why. If you press refresh, it'll pop up. But as we can see from WoW Analyzer, he actually had 98.41% of his damage buffed from Inquisition, so he used it pretty okay. He wasn't that far off from being optimal. And honestly, considering he wasn't that far off, he should probably commit to trying to use it more often.
Maybe use like lazy or drunk or who knows? Like, it's a heroic raid, right? Like, he might even think oh, I'm going to be doing AoE, so I want to use DP. You know, like, who knows?
Yeah, on the WoW Analyzer now as well, when you use Inquisition inside your wings, it'll give you a little alert red box around it. It'll say you refreshed Inquisition during Avenging Wrath. It's better to refresh early before Avenging Wrath so you can spend Holy Power on damage during it. And what the rule is for that is if your Inquisition is at 20 seconds or lower and your Avenging Wrath is coming off of cooldown in 15 seconds, you would want to, at that point, you can go ahead and refresh your Inquisition early with 3 Holy Power to make sure it lasts the entire duration of Wing. And you just lose a few seconds of Pandemic, which isn't too much in the grand scheme. It's more valuable to do that than to waste a global inside of Wing.
The simple way of thinking about it is my Inquisition going to fall during Wings? Because you really don't want to be refreshing it, which is why it's important to have tools to know these things. I made a Weakor for myself that shows if Inquisition is below like 8 seconds. If Wings isn't up, and if Wings is going to be up, it tells me to refresh it at 20 seconds because of that. Like, do stuff like that. Figure out what you need to do to make stuff. Don't get caught in the trap of I'll just do better. Figure out a tool so you don't have to be better. And you don't have, like, think about the least amount of things possible, basically, is how I go about doing it. Find the tools you need. And know simple things, like don't use Inquisition inside of Wing. But overall, there's really not... there's not a whole lot to break down here. I mean, it's a heroic log, and he clearly is either using Hikili and following it very well, or like knows what he, for the most part.
Yeah, we had a question here in chat. It was on fights like Mithrax or any fight that has run out mechanics, what's the best way to properly analyze your downtime? In cases like that, you can't really rely on something like this window here. Sometimes you'll see a button for experimental downtime. Sometimes you won't. But what you can do is you'll want to bring up your log. You'll go to your cast. You'll change this cast by spell, cast by source. And you want to see if you have large gaps. If you have large gaps like this, and you're not running out for a mechanic, or if you're seeing visible space between these bars, it means something is either wrong or you're doing a mechanic. And basically just looking at the timeline and seeing how far your abilities are spaced out. If you're seeing a lot of gaps in your rotation, you want to see, is it an issue with your rotation itself? Are you adjusting to the fight, or are you running out? And you can cross-check that using your debuffs. But it does take a bit more effort to analyze downtime on a fight where you potentially have to run a lot. And even on fights where there's lots of mechanics where you have to move, if it's a fight where you can move and still be in boss range, you want to keep on doing that. That can be harder on some fights. But that's one thing that people that are more familiar with encounters will do. They know how to maximize their space to still be on the boss, or to still stay on the boss as much as possible. But at the same time, you don't want to risk wiping your raid because you're trying to DPS horror. So there's a fine line between it. Gotta be careful.
Use your big brain.
I wonder why Hikili doesn't work for the opener. It's a funny
It just
thing to check.
doesn't do
Sequences.
I bet I could make it work.
No, yeah, like you were kind of out way went over it. Like he can make it work. He can like make like a array or a table or reads off of it. It's what happens though. Like, should that opener only show up on raid bosses? And if it does only show on raid bosses, what happens if the user presses a button not in that sequence? What should they do? How should it display that?
Yeah, so it can read off an order, but it doesn't really know what to do if you fuck up. Because like the opener doesn't account for you getting like a blade proc. Or, you know.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna monkey around with that today.
Go ahead. There's a Discord. I don't know if you're in it, but he's pretty active in there. We love Hikili here, by the way. Shout out to Hikili.
Yes.
My favorite shaman.
All right. So one thing that we mentioned in the log earlier, that the opener is, it's not make or break for your DPS. And Legion, that was a lot more relevant. And if you remember why in Legion, it was because Crusade. And with the possibility of Crusade being an actual good talent to use, you want to get your opener right.
Yeah, it can absolutely be the difference between a 30,000 opener and a 40,000 opener, which can be quite considerable, especially if the fight opens with the necessity to burst something down right away.
Mm-hmm.
And also like things we're seeing like with the introduction of that light decree trait, even though Hammer Wrath is pretty much sitting higher already, that extra 5 seconds, that just makes Hammer Wrath the default pick no matter what.
Yep.
You were locked into that talent.
Just be happy that we're locked into Zeo. What is the stupid hammer execution sentence? Be happy that we're not doing execution sentence in Crusade. Because, oh my god.
That would be amazing, though. Like, think of the burst
Oh,
potential.
I did that once on Gahoon because we were having trouble getting him down during the light. Oh, that was the worst.
In the beginning, right?
It's
oh, yeah,
so
the
much...
very first time we killed it on Hero.
And for some of you, if any of you bought the B trinket before it got nerfed and you didn't disenchant it, with that extra 5 seconds of wings in Crusade, you might want to dust that B trinket off.
It's sitting in my bank.
Yeah. Go get lucky, buy a 375 Titan Forge socket one.
There was one on the auction house earlier this week for 500,000. And I looked at it and I was like, ooh, I had money.
Good.
I wonder if it's still there.
Probably nothing sells on our server.
Hey, some things sell. I sell a lot of Fathoms decks.
Or alternatively, you could use the Rage Trinket coming out of next year, and that'll give you something like combined with Crusade and Relentless Inquisitor and Bloodlust, 200 some odd %. It's actually just a ridiculous opener.
Yeah, I'm excited for like the potential for fun, like cheesy, even if it's not like the most optimal.
Yeah, no, it certainly isn't. But what it does bring back to a degree is the old Hammer of Wrath rotation we had in Warlords of Draenor, where it was just this metronome of Hammer of Wrath, something else, Hammer of Wrath, something else, so on and so on.
I know
kind
people
of
hated
essentially
that. A
what
lot
we
of people
have.
hated that, but I enjoyed that. I don't know.
I loved it. It's just so soothing. It is really a metronome.
But that, I mean, that's not saying it's going to happen all the time. I mean, you need the correct variables to line up. You need your Crusade up and you need Blood. But if you have those factors, that's kind of what you're dealing with.
Yeah, I guess one thing that we can talk about here, though, is the trinkets that we have available in battle and why they're annoying.
Oof, yeah.
It's still on the auction house.
So let me actually bring up the trinkets again, because I don't remember all the names, but there's one trinket that I hate.
Let me guess. It's that Grand one or Gronk?
There's a couple trinkets I'm ignoring in general, like the new Draft of Souls. Like, forget about that. It doesn't even pop in my mind.
Oh, that's gonna be so can.
Yeah, in case you're not aware, they are adding a new Draft of Souls where you get stuck for 3 seconds and have to melee the boss a bunch. Yeah, but there's a couple new trinkets. One, it's the trinket that looks pretty okay is the one from Jaina. It's somewhat reminiscent of the empty drinking horn from Manaroth back in Hellfire Citadel.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as interesting trinkets go, that one is definitely the most interesting. But as far as some trinkets we have that are kind of frustrating, like there's some that are designed for AoE, there's some for single target. One of the more single target focused trinkets is the Gigavolt generator, or whatever it's called, from the Mechatork fight. And the way it works is it's a haste steroid that decays. The problem with that trinket, though, is that it has a 1.5-minute cooldown. And a lot of the value of that trinket is tied to that 1.5-minute cooldown. So that trinket was designed for warriors, is pretty much the TLDR. And because that trinket is meant for warriors, it's horrible for us.
Other specs unaffected.
Yeah, it's very hard to get a lot of value out of that for us because it just starts so low and it ramps up over time, and you only get 8 seconds of this huge chunk of haste. But for us, that isn't a whole lot to work with. Whereas, you look at warriors, they're activating all these concentric abilities as the ramping value of that trinket is really low. So by the time they have all their buffs up, that trinket's going to be stacked up, and they're just doing insane amounts of damage. I wonder if the same would be true with that other trinket for them. That not empty drinking horn. That
the anchor
that Nighthold trinket. Yeah.
So here's I have an alternate. It's the variable intensity gigavolt oscillating reactor. Very appropriate name.
Yeah.
Also known as the Vigor. So if you're wondering, if you exclude the cooldown, if you want to know how much haste that gives you overall, if you think of that Gale Caller's Beak trinket from the World Boss, it actually provides 1 less haste on average than that trinket, excluding the cooldown. But once you factor in the cooldown of this trinket, it just makes it that much worse. So it's already slightly worse, but not realistically. Then you factor in the cooldown on it's worse. It's just not good.
Yeah, that just means it's going to be well. What that means is it's going to be similar to the Beak trinket, but for other people, it's going to be a hell of a lot better for them. So that's going to leave you with an empty sack where you end up trading off until everybody has them but you.
Yeah, and the one from Jaina is the Everchill anchor here. You have a strength on it, and your damaging melee abilities apply Everchill, dealing 64 frost damage every 3 seconds, and reducing movement speed, stacking it to 10 times, and it'll last for 12 seconds.
And that trinket is actually going to be very good for us because we can apply it to multiple targets, and we stack it pretty.
Yep.
So when you're running Mythic Plus, this trinket will be doubly effective. The ability to throw at a slow like that on when you're cutting trash packs is going to be huge.
Especially with those blizzard nerfs.
Yeah.
We should have made a list of the things we wanted to rant, but I feel like we ranted about most of them.
Yeah, what happened? A lot of the rant got in between when I was gonna bring up the hectic ad cleave chart. The whole rant happened right there, and then we had to circle back.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the hill to die on was right there, I guess.
But I mean, I don't know. Maybe we got our point across. I feel like we did.
I think we did.
It's just
it wasn't
a whirlwind
me that
of.
got on the hill. That was.
Yeah, I kind of got carried away.
And just we will have another stream before the raid comes out, so we'll talk more about what we're looking at in the raid as well at that point. But this is just a little bit of our side rant. We have one great trinket, and the rest of the trinkets suck from the raid, which is par for the course for us, really. So nothing new.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a raid tier if the trinkets weren't shit for red.
I'm just imagining one day we're all gonna get this trinket on the first day. We're gonna go to sleep. We're gonna wake up 70%.
I was gonna say somebody toss out that 70% emoji.
Other specs unaffected.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even really bother doing much with trinkets until the raid comes out anyway, because there's just no point. They like to put their grubby little fucking hands on the trinkets a million times before things.
Mhm.
Yeah, tell me about it.
You know, Convergence of Fates, that's too much, but Draft of Souls,
That's
send
fine.
that shit right on.
Yeah, Convergence of
Yeah,
Fates.
that's the good
Just ignore
stuff.
the fact that Fury Warriors used it up until the pre-patch.
This is fine. .jpg.
Should a trinket last 3 raid tiers at 895 eye level?
Absolutely not. Unless you're a warrior, then it's fine. I feel like there was something that we wanted to talk about, but we didn't
Probably
I don't
is.
know.
get the
I wanted to talk about my Nerdo spreadsheet, but
I guess you brought it
Well,
up now, so we kind of have to. So
oh, great, dude. Oh, yeah, cool. So I made a spreadsheet that's sort of the answer to the question. Like, okay, well, I get it. Pawn sucks. I'm not going to use it, but my raid leader wants me to give him a pawn value for stuff. So what do I do? So
It's
I made a
also good
spreadsheet.
for other
Right?
stuff too.
Well, it is
Direct
handy
them to
because
this
what it
video.
does is it simulates every possible piece of gear you can get from the raid, and then spits out both a percentage upgrade like a pawn value and a raw DPS value, so you don't have to sim things on.
It's really nice. I actually got asked, like, our loot council was like, is Thor just like making? I'm like, no, he has a spreadsheet.
So I will show the old one here for old year that isn't publicly available. This is an idea of what it looks like. I'm not sure how much different it is now, but this is what it used to look like. As you can see here,
It is
it got kind of
nice.
resized a little bit. It would show each boss. It would show unsocketed, socketed. It would show the percentage upgrade that piece was for you.
It's basically just like how to make loot council easier. And like literally do all of your simming before the raid. For those of you who are like, but the line is too low.
As you can see, I added my own notes here. And like this, I hate this trinket, syringe. I hate all raid trinkets, but this is the first one in this tier. We gotta hate it.
Not gonna lie, this might be the most persnickety thing ever. There's just so much detail thrown into every little aspect, and in reality, you could just boil it down to, well, it's a 25 eye level upgrade for this guy and only 20 for you, so chances are it's going to be better for him despite having superior stats.
It is really nice for like Azure and Trinket where like everybody does actually have to go sim it out.
Yeah, the version that I'm working off of right now, it boils this down to much simpler than this. It gets rid of the whole socketed section there and just says, okay, if you got a socket on something, it's worth 80 DPS. Have fun.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I've been working on. It was just a fun little side project.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice breakdown to kind of determine what would be best for you should you acquire.
It'll be
Yeah,
really good at the beginning of next raid.
Yeah, the one
When
that
you're
I've got
getting
set up for
upgrades.
next tier, what it does some other new things too. Like it tells me how many upgrades are available in any given difficulty. It'll tell me like, no bosses have anything in normal. Bye.
So do you have every Azurite gear permutation available with that as well? Or is
Sure
that something-
do.
Oh Jesus, that
Yeah,
might
it does every
actually come in
possible
handy.
permutation of Azurite and picks the best one off the list. And
Yeah.
it also tells me which bosses would get the best result for spending a coin. Or I mean, it will. I haven't written it yet. You know.
For those of you who don't know, Thor is like low-key crazy. It's
Yeah.
fine, but so yeah, I mean this is actually gonna be really, really nice if you get it off the ground.
Yeah, no, I was thinking I'd probably have it ready for patch day when 8.1.
That would be sweet.
You want to see the beautiful index match converted statements here?
Oh,
Because forget about VLOOKUP.
Oh, VLOOKUPs for dorks. Oh man, you should see some of the nested index match things for going through all 8 permutations of Azerite gear in the new raid for
can only
each
imagine.
piece.
So I guess a couple of caveats about this when it is eventually released is that if you run it on your own computer, it's gonna take a while, and if you do have Raidbots Premium, it's still gonna take a while.
Yeah, the one for I'm actually doing one for Mythic Dungeons too, so I can tell which dungeons are worthwhile for me to run. That one actually takes up to the cap for like premium subscription to Raidbots. It takes the full hour.
Gee, that's not surprising at all. There's got to be something like 2,000 different combinations at the very least. You got to crawl through.
Yep.
What would be interesting is if you could actually break that down a little bit and remove a third of those variables by actually encouraging players to save up all their Titan residue from the pre-patch. So when we launch into the next raid, you can pick up a 415 specific piece right away, and that'll really narrow down possible permutations of other gear you could pick up that would result in an upgrade.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's something you could do as well.
Probably.
Because
I got nothing but time right now.
Yeah, that would actually be really useful. Like if we were able to tell players, go get the Pauldrons of the Horned Horror out of Waycrest Manor, get that geared up and socketed at a 415, and then go from there. That could.
I know. I think I could probably figure something out like that. Anyways, no, I just wanted to plugging a dumb project I'm working on. I thought it was kind of goofy.
I think it's gonna be pretty useful. I'll probably use it because like a lot of time I pass on stuff that is probably gonna be an upgrade because I'm raid leader and looter and GM, so it's like it's gonna be an upgrade for somebody else they can have.
Yeah,
I can't be
just sort of like
just...
I could go sim this right now, or I could go through everybody else's results that just sent me numbers.
So yeah, this is pretty sweet.
Yeah, this is my answer to Pawn.
Well, I'd like to pick a hill. It's a small hill, it's not a huge hill. Consecration did get buffed, which we didn't talk about.
Yeah, Consecration did get buffed, and when you sim your character on the patch, you'll see that Consecration will probably sim higher than Wake in most cases.
And you probably still won't use it.
Exactly. Like the logic for using it is going to break down. It's going to be the exact same predicament we have now. I mean, you could realistically use it even now on fights like Vectus, dropping it every time an ad spawns. But the variables required for it to actually be worth using just don't really exist in practical terms. So, you could buff it to be 20% better than Wake, and we could still really look at it and go, well, I don't know. Because we're not always operating on 20-second and 45-second intervals like in dungeons.
Yeah, which is one of the frustrating things. Like Ion mentioned, like sometimes because community perception is an issue, they'll sometimes over buff something so people will use it. So what it looks like here is out of Divine Judgment and Consecration, they decided to try to push people to use Consecration more, while still leaving Divine Judgment there in the dust.
Yeah.
Well, it got buffed across the board, right, for all specs.
Yeah.
So I don't even know if it has anything to do with this. I just think that people are gonna see it sims higher, and like I don't think it's gonna see much use. Like we see this all the time where something technically sims higher, but people just don't use it because it's a pain in the ass. Like in WoD, Empowered Seals simmed higher for like a fraction of time, and people still didn't use it because it was a pain in the ass to use.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, they could buff this thing to oblivion. I hope they do buff it again and see that people still won't.
Yeah. I mean, they could do that, but in practical terms, I think it's at a point now where you could, as a player who doesn't really care about the details very much, take either talent and do just as well as you would otherwise. But if you're talking about players doing Mythic Plus and planning polls and planning around cooldowns, then Wake of Ashes just wins because it does a huge amount of upfront damage, a huge amount of holy power generation, and it jives well with what you can plan around. Whereas Consecration is just this splooge of damage and a little bit of holy power that replaces essentially Crusader Strike in rotation, and that's not typically exciting nor useful.
And just imagine in a pack, you have your wings up, you wake, you Divine Storm, you get a proc for Divine Purpose, use your Divine Purpose, you get Empyrean Power proc, hit Empyrean Power. Just imagine the numbers.
Oh,
it's just even a casual player can grab Consecration. It feels cumbersome. It feels like it's just there. It exists. Even if you don't understand how it falls off or whatever, how it's better, or it doesn't feel great. It feels pretty bad.
I think things have to go right for Consecration to be worth taking than for Wake of Ashes. So it's less likely to be an ideal choice in reality, and that Wake of Ashes just really jumpstarts your rotation at the start of a fight too, or going into a burst period.
And we also used it for an entire expansion, so it feels great, and we're familiar with it.
Yeah, basically you could just boil it down to is Wake is too mechanically robust. If Consecration had something else tacked onto it that wasn't just damage, then it might be worth taking. You know, like you're using a holy power finisher during Consecration shifts it to your current location. Or something like that.
I would run circles around the boss to piss people off. Letting it be.
And then
that just about covers it, doesn't it?
Yeah, that is pretty much everything here, unless we can think of any last things we want to rant about, or any more hills to die on.
New traits are good but annoying. Consecration is still dumb. Thanks for tuning in.
Oh, I'm sure I'll have something to rant about when we do this again in January.
Oh man, yeah, I'm gonna be writing down everything I get mad about.
We'll start writing down our rants, and we'll have a 8-hour stream next time.
I'm telling you, we write down our rants and do them ASMR.
Well, if I write down a rant, then this is just going to be a 45-minute soapbox. So I don't.
Yeah, that's fine.
No, if we should do that.
Then we can put it on YouTube and have like a picture of you over in the corner making that face. You know what I'm talking about. I don't have to show you a picture. You know what the face is. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, there we go. The Hammer of Rant. Tune in January for the Hammer of Rant. So, as always, later on, I will have this uploaded to YouTube because Twitch deletes VODs in like 14 days or something crazy. So I'll have it on YouTube. The YouTube channel is in the description there. The schedule is there, so there is no prot stream next week as of yet. I don't know if that will change. So our next scheduled stream is Holy on the 22nd. And we'll have our next Ret stream in January. Or actually, technically, is it December? I thought it would be December technically still.
I'm not going in December. I'm gonna screw that.
So we'll have to see. As of right now, it would be December 29th for the next Ret stream, but we'll have to see what the deal is there. But if not, then we'll still have a Ret stream. Like literally, like right now is the week before the patch comes out. We will have a Ret stream a week before the raid comes out on the same day. So we'll have more than for sure. But thank you everyone for tuning in. If you have anything else that comes in, we're in Discord. You can ask questions in Discord or talk in Discord. But thank you everyone that came here as well today, and have a great day.